Your new book, My Family, is Welldoing's Book of the Month, and you wrote it following the death of both parents. What is it you're trying to achieve in this book?
Well, I think the key death of the two was my mum's in 2000 and late 2014, and particularly her funeral, where a lot of people were coming up to me and saying to me that my mother was wonderful over and over again. And after a while, this began to sort of trigger me because I have what I consider to be a sort of slightly incontinent truth gene, and it felt to me like as more and more people said she was wonderful, I wanted to say, did you really know her? Because my mother was not platitudinously wonderful. She was, in her own way, wonderful. She was an object of wonder, but that involved a lot of idiosyncrasies and a lot of weirdness, a lot of transgressive, mad behavior. And that is how I wanted to remember her. I didn't want to remember her in this idealized way. And nor did I want to remember my dad, who had, in his latter years, suffered from a type of dementia. I didn't want to sort of, idealize that, just talk about him being a nice, sweet man out of existence. I think that's what happens when people die, is that we sort of imagine them in this way. But as I say in the book, the dead, despite what we might like to think, are not angels. And so that's where it came from, the need to be true to both of my parents, and also knowing that their real story is rich and strange and funny. And therefore, this book, which is going to be very warts and all, it's a warts and all celebration. It's a book of sort of it's got tragedy in it, it's got sadness in it, but primarily it's funny. And for me, that's why I wanted to write it. It's a celebration of how hilarious, at some level, my parents were.
So you were one of three boys growing up in Dollis Hill in the 60s and 70s,
Yeah.
and some of the parenting, that your parents indulged in would now be seen as negligent. Can you give us an example of that
Well,
what passed then?
there's lots of extreme negligence from my parents. There's straightforward negligence. When I went to secondary school, I went to secondary school quite a long way away from Dollis Hill, in Elstree, and they just didn't get up because I had to get up quite early to make me breakfast. And so my older brother, to whom I basically look to for parenting, I think he is my parent, basically, my older brother, Ivor, used to make my breakfast for me. That's very straightforward. A more complex form of negligence is my mother was having an affair with a golfing memorabilia collector, and was very, very keen to tell everyone about this, and also transformed our house into a kind of golfing memorabilia shrine, becoming herself obsessed with golfing memorabilia, writing 5 books about golfing memorabilia, putting golf memorabilia everywhere we looked, and making it very clear that she was very proud of this affair, kind of eroticizing the least erotic thing in the world, which is golf memorabilia. And that's quite a lot to deal with when you're 13. And also, he was called David. So that involved, a lot of times where I would be basically listening to my mum, basically crying or whatever for David, and not worrying about the fact that me next door might be thinking this is confusing. So yeah, there was a lot going on. And also, my dad was just a sort of aggravated man. My dad, I think I describe him as someone who liked food, football, and shouting, "Who the this now?" every time the phone rang. And so he didn't have much time for sort of, affection for his children. Most of his affection, I would say, was for the cat. And by the way, I have 4 cats, so I've definitely carried that on. But I think I do also show affection to my children. But, he was a Welsh working class bloke who was very clever, but emotionally very inarticulate. And yeah, it didn't involve him showing a lot of love for his children.
So in this book, in some ways it's a celebration of your parents, of their oddities and the different
Yeah.
way things were then. But when you were young, did you feel ashamed of your parents?
I don't think I did. I don't think I have the gene for shame, certainly in latter years. And that's a lot to do with my mother, I think, because my mother was a very demonstrative woman and very keen to tell you about things that most people might be ashamed of, like having an affair. She was desperate for people to know that she was having an affair because she thought it was glamorous. Um, so I don't really have shame. it's hard to remember, but I think when I was a kid, or certainly when I was a young teenager, I was already obsessed with comedy, and was listening to lots of comedy and starting to think about performing comedy. And so I was looking for it, I think, in my own life. And I think I thought very early on, they're kind of hilarious, my parents. It's particularly hilarious that my mother is this golfing memorabilia queen when like no one in our family has ever been interested in golf, and it's obviously because she's having an affair, but somehow my dad isn't noticing it. That's hilarious, right? And also my dad was really, really sweary, like incredible king of like making up swear words, and all of this meant that when I used to go around to other people's houses and their parents would be quite respectable and nice, I just thought, no, they're not. They're a bit dull compared
Mm.
to my parents. So I wasn't ashamed of them. I thought they were funny. I knew they were difficult, but I thought they were funny.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about having quite a lot of therapy in your 30s. Did you talk much about your parents at that time? Do you feel they had a strong effect on the way you are now?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I had lots of different types of therapy, and I did have cognitive behavioral therapy because I had something of a midlife crisis and something of an anxiety disorder in my 30s. And I was a bit suspicious, I think, of very long-term psychodynamic psychotherapy. I think because I thought in a slightly maybe my dad inflected kind of way, slightly male way. No, I just want something that will fix this. And so I did look to the sort of mantras of cognitive behavioral therapy first of all, but then I ended up in long-term therapy with a relational therapist. And I'm glad I did that. I think it gave me something to navigate maybe this story that I'm now telling with greater kind of like detachment, and I'm able to tell the story of my early life in a way that then I think it was more sort of mixed up within me, I guess. I kind of like the way in which I'm talking about it being funny, but knowing it was damaging and sort of separating that and understanding this is, I can celebrate this, but maybe this is too much. This is transgressive. This is just seriously hilarious. Maybe this is a bit of all this stuff, these judgments about who you are and how your life has affected you. I think I was helped by spending a long time in therapy. I was
Mm.
helped as a storyteller because that's what therapy is. It's how you tell the story of your own life.
Mm. And then now you have two children who are coming up to adulthood, and you're married. And how do you think your family, the family you've made for yourself, is different from your own?
Well, there's many things. I think there's not a lot of secrets in my family, I don't think, partly because one way I've reacted to my childhood is that I am obsessed with truth, not very good at anything that isn't true. So I'm constantly just like actually, and that has its own problems. My wife said to me recently, "Have you ever thought about saying the second thing that comes into your head?" And I do tend to just speak out loud without stopping, and I don't have much of a filter. Now that, as I say, might have its problems, but it has a healthy thing as well, which is my family and I think my children feel very much that there is an authenticity to who I am and what their life is. There isn't that thing that I had where I'm watching someone essentially performing a persona half the time. My mum being golf memorabilia queen of North London was a performance, right? And a performance that was inspired by a very weird transgressive thing. And there's none of that. And there's
Mm.
also a very deep, and I'm very much not alone in this. I think this is a generational thing, engagement with my children. I am very keen on being with my children, on knowing what my children want and who they are, on feeling friendly with my children. I mean, that is an interesting thing. There's not much talked about, I think, is I am very close friends with my wife, very close friends with my children. And that's something that certainly didn't exist in our house at home. And I don't know if it existed at all in general in the sort of 60s and 70s. The idea of friendship, of just convivial life, laughing, being with, hanging out with, and enjoying hanging out with your family, that wasn't really a thing. I did with my brothers, but not
Mm.
with my parents, and they didn't feel like it. They were enjoying hanging out with us. Not that they it's not that they hated it, but it just wasn't a thing for them. They had their friends and their family was something that they had to do as well. But my parents were also off doing their stuff. You know, they were solipsistic people. They were both only children. They'd both had very damaging childhoods. And so, yeah, there wasn't that much space in them for really engaging with these people who were also living in their house, i.e., their children.
Well, you've managed to take this, this obviously somewhat eccentric family and turn it into a very funny but also moving book. So thanks for that. And we're
Thank you.
delighted to say it's the Welldoing Book of the Month for July.
I'm very honored. Thank you very much. Thank
Good.
you,
I'm
everybody.
pleased.
Thank
Okay.
you,
Thanks for
Louise.
talking to us, David.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye.